His reviews will get you further than the film will ever go. If you give him just a moment of your time, he'll let you know which movies rock, which movies stink, which movies shouldn't have been released. Say hello to Confused Matthew.
My experience with alcohol, tobacco, and narcotics is extremely limited and confined. This must be clearly understood before I begin to review this movie. What the hell, let's just lay them all out on the table. I smoked cigarettes for 3 years from 1997 to 2000. I had a brief infatuation with alcohol in 2002, and I mean really brief. We're talking about 3 to 5 months brief. With regard to drugs, I had a Vicodin problem for, let's say, a sporadic amount of time. And that's honestly all I've done. So you have to understand that I'm on the outside looking in when it comes to this movie. For to say that this movie is about drugs is the understatement of a lifetime. This may well be the druggiest drug movie that I've ever drugged. There is no plot to this movie whatsoever. It's essentially one long stream of consciousness from the point of view of one man. The majority of the film revolves around various drug-induced antics of him and his attorney as they go all over Las Vegas and do things while on drugs. Now, it may seem like a recipe for a film I wouldn't like, but I have to be clear right from the get-go that I didn't exactly think this movie was bad. I mostly just didn't know what to make of it. The most interesting aspects of the film come from looking at it as a character study. Our main character, Raoul Duke, carries the torch of perspective in this film. He describes the world as he sees it. The fascinating part about this is that if you just look at his rantings and behavior from an outsider's perspective, he comes off as a random nut. But when you get into his head via the narration, things start to make a strange kind of sense. I like how his narrations made things sound more important than they actually were. This film does a good job of getting you into his world, even though that world makes no sense at all. As I've said elsewhere, I really like Johnny Depp as an actor, although I think he's been grossly overused in recent years. He's played some great characters, and it can often be hard to choose a favorite. But this film made that very easy. This is my favorite character Johnny Depp has ever played. His personality borders on caricature. Everything is overemphasized, from his facial features to his manner of speaking. But there is also a consistency to his character, even in this whirlwind of drug use. His attorney is a shitstorm of peaks and valleys. Sometimes he's lucid and reasonable, other times he's random and paranoid. It's almost as if he's two different people at any given time on any given drug. But no matter what Raoul is on, his personality never really changes, only his behavior changes. If there were ever a movie where a single character was enough to pull me through, it's this one. Now, as for the subject matter, as I said, I am an outsider. Never mind being born 20 years too late for the 60s, the drug culture is something I've only ever seen from the opposite side of the glass. I've never gotten too close to the flame myself, but I did have a lot of friends who fucked themselves up on drugs pretty bad, in a bad way. So on a subjective level, there were aspects of this movie that really only made me sad. There was a particular scene in a bathtub that hit a little too close to home for me. This was in no way the movie's fault, but personal experience made that pretty hard to watch. I thought it was interesting that every time Raoul talked about the effects of the drugs he was on, he never had a positive thing to say about it. His narration on the experience is almost its own drug PSA, yet he keeps coming back for more. When describing the negative effects the drugs had on his motor control, mood, and sense of reality, the thing this movie kept making me question is why anyone would ever want to do this to themselves in the first place. Now, if I had, I would no doubt understand, but that's really the fork in the road for me. There is only so much this movie can do to get you into this world if you've never been. I had never seen this movie until it was requested, but my friends of days past had seen it, and I remember them telling me how damningly accurate the imagery was in recreating an acid trip, especially, apparently, the floor moving around. But after seeing it myself, I still don't get it. And this is a great example of why the objective versus the subjective has always fascinated me. You can replicate the imagery of an experience perfectly, but you can never replicate the experience itself. For anyone who has never been on Vicodin but wants to know what it's kinda like this.
Get it down with the podcast. Think more with the podcast. Backpack with the podcast. Like the man said, don't lose your head.
Now, this may help you to understand what I'm talking about, that it's a semi-psychedelic experience of some kind, but unless you've experienced it for yourself, you can never know. By the way, Confused Matthew does not and is not advocating the use of drugs. Occasionally, this movie will offer up an insight into something other than drug use. There is one particular scene where Raoul talks about what it was like to be a person in the 60s. This is another subject that has always fascinated me, the transition from the 50s to the 60s. I don't think there has ever been a moment in history where the culture changed so radically in a short amount of time. Raoul notes at one point in the film that the 60s was an era where we were all completely certain that nothing we were doing could possibly be wrong. This entire narration is something I had to go back and watch again because it was so fascinating. We also get a parody of the old anti-drug propaganda films that is positively hilarious. The film describes a dope fiend and explains that his pants are stained with semen from masturbating too much in between finding his next rape victim. This is just barely a parody of those asinine propaganda films, and it made me laugh my ass off. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas occupies a world that I have very seldom entered, and even when I did, it was only on a guest pass and all I did was ride around on the monorail. It's a nice place to visit, but I certainly wouldn't want to live there. I think this movie will naturally play better for people who have lived there, who have more experience with the drug culture than I do. For me, it was only mildly interesting, with a great character and a few subjects that made me think. Good enough for cult status, maybe, but the next time I watch this movie, it will likely only be in parts. The end.